I am back with my best friend John Morrow for part two of our fun, uh, meandering conversation and musing about Jack Kirby and my Jack Kirby inspired comic, Doris Danger Giant Monsters Amok. Um, John, I wanted to go back a little to something you said earlier. You mentioned that you kind of got, I wasn't clear if you had gotten out of comics or if you had gotten out of Kirby uh, reading comics. Early on, were you like a reader of comics and you stopped reading them, or were you trying to draw them, or?
Oh no, I mean I was into comics from age 6, I think. I got gifted a Scooby-Doo comic and that got me started. Um, I like to tell the story that that comic lasted me about 18 hours because I read it and loaned it to a kid down the street. And I found that the next day it rained that night and it was out in his backyard completely soaked and ruined. So that was my first one. Maybe that's why I didn't do any funny animal kind of comics after that. But after that, it was superheroes all the way. So, and I discovered Kirby around age. When did Commandy number 12 come out?
Huh.
That would have been 73. So probably around age 11, maybe, or 12. I didn't pick it up off the stands, but I got it in a trade with a friend of mine. And at that point, I'd heard the name Jack Kirby before, but I didn't really it wasn't really on my radar. Um, and um, and but in a trade with a friend, and there was this thing with Commandy with this guy and this giant grasshopper jumping at you. And I'm like, I don't want this. And he says, well, I don't want it. You got to take it as part of the trade. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Throw everything else in the stack and save that at the bottom of the stack. And I'm like, okay, I guess I got nothing else to read. I'll read it. And by the time I finished that issue, it was like the heaven, the clouds had parted, and you could hear the harps in heavens. Oh, this is something special for you. And it just blew my mind. And after that, I immediately started working backwards, picking up Commandy first of all, because at that point I think Jack was almost done with the series. I think I first one I picked up off the stands was maybe number 32 or 33, and 40 was his last issue. But I worked backwards from there. Then I started picking up the Fourth World stuff. I was reading Comics Buyer's Guide, and they were all talking about how great that was. And so I picked up the Fourth World stuff, and that blew my mind. That is to this day still my favorite Kirby work. But just read Kirby throughout, all the way up and through the '80s, through college. I graduated college in '86. At that point, he was pretty much done with comics. And then by '88, I was pretty much done with comics too. I think Watchmen, Dark Knight came out. Those were great. I thought they were wonderful. But at that point, I felt like, that's how much further can comics go, at least for my interest level. Once I kind of just sold off my collection, like I said, to help with our down payment on our first house. Just kept the Jack Kirby and Neil Adams stuff that I really liked the most, mostly Kirby. And that was it. I thought I was done with comics. And then with our early advertising firm, we had and I'd always wanted to go to Comic-Con to meet Jack Kirby because I knew he was there every year. They talked about it in CBG, and I never tried a million times as a kid to find some way to get out to California from Alabama, and there was no way that was going to happen. And then my wife and I were working with an illustrator out in LA for a project for one of our clients. And we thought, we could fund this as a business trip out there to meet with him. And while I'm there, I could maybe go meet Jack Kirby and go to Comic-Con. Now, I've always heard San Diego Con is the best thing ever. And so we worked it out. I got to spend a whole afternoon at Comic-Con, but just barely got to see Jack Kirby before I had to leave. I got to talk to him for like 5 minutes, but that was in 1991. That was just truly a life-changing moment. If I hadn't done that, I don't know how different my life would be today, but it would definitely be different. And from there, he died in '94. Got the idea to do this crazy magazine, and just been doing it ever since. So and honestly, I'm really glad because what is it, 2008, the recession hit, and we lost 90% of our advertising clients. They all took it in-house. We're doing horrible, horrible work, but they were saving a lot of money that way. And shortly before, a couple years before that, my wife had said to me, she said, we're getting older and people don't want, they don't want 40, 50-year-old graphic designers. They want 20, 30-year-old graphic designers. Well, you better think about maybe this publishing thing, we need to ramp that up a little bit. And if you look at the history of our output, right around, I think, 2005, 2006, we started doing more books. I think we launched an extra magazine then. just with that goal in mind. That's totally like we're talking about our wives helping us out. That was her brilliant idea, being a prognosticator of what the future held might hold for us. And thankfully she did, or I'd probably be, I don't know, flipping burgers today. I have no idea. But yeah, how did your career trajectory end up? I mean, because no, I don't mean to downplay what you're doing with Doris Danger in any way, but that's pretty out there. Why in the world would you suddenly, okay, the world needs a nice homage to the Atlas monster books of the late '50s. Uh, I mean, surely you didn't plan on that to be your main source of income. I'm sure, right?
No, no. Uh, my first comics project was called Tabloia Weekly Magazine, and it was 32 pages. And Doris Danger was just a 5 page, really an afterthought, honestly, because I had been working on the other stories when I met Dick, and yeah, I was gonna go back to my experience with Kirby. I never had the opportunity to meet him, and I started collecting comics also in elementary school, and I at the time John Byrne was really popular, and Frank Miller, and so I looked at them as these realistic comics people, and then I would pick up the Hunger Dogs graphic novel and go, what is this? These people, they're all shiny. Why are they so shiny? And they're so barrel chested, and they're cartoony looking. And what is this? I can't stand this. And I would get upset about Jack Kirby's art. When I grew up, there were also available reprints of the old '60s stuff, and so I would read the first issue of Hulk and things like that, and not put together that this was the same artist, because his art got more stylized. And so growing up, I had this feeling of, oh, that guy Kirby. And then in college, I was studying, Picasso and Francis Bacon and art, because back in the '80s and '90s, comics weren't a legitimate art form yet in colleges. Things are very different now, and so the comics got hid under the table while I was in college. Um, but then coming out of college and going back into the comics shop, I I was thinking about, oh, I don't like this Kirby stuff. The women's fingernails look like they were sharpened in pencil sharpeners, and they're not pretty to me. And then I thought, well, wait a second. I appreciate Picasso, and he's not drawing realistic like Frank Miller and John Byrne. And it caused me to kind of re you know analyze what is this, and it was right at that point that I was picking up these giant monsters comics and things, and so I was a very late comer to the appreciation of what Kirby did. I was stuck over here in what I thought wasn't okay that he did, and in being stuck there, I wasn't witnessing, all this magic that he was doing. And so Doris Danger, to finally get to your question, um, one thing that I really appreciated about my college education wasn't so much actual practical art skills, but thinking about art, and thinking about things like, uh, how does Kirby use this just raw power and energy, in his work and in his compositions or whatever, or what does it mean that he chose this character to be the hero, and this character to be the villain, and I'm thinking of like the Eternals, where he kind of tweaks things on you, where you assume this is the stereotypical villain, but you realize it's a character with really great qualities, and so I think a lot. I'm an analytical artist. I'm not so much into just you know, like you said, you read my Doris Danger, and then you reread it and you realize, oh, there was something here. That's because all the work in Doris Danger is up here for months. You know,
It shows. I can tell you put a lot of thought into that. It's
yeah,
not just goofing on something that they thought was silly.
right.
Um,
And
the level of seriousness that you put into it, you can tell it's not just making fun of the work. It truly is paying tribute to it, but also keeping it very entertaining and very funny.
I
Um,
appreciate that. Yeah.
yeah, it's a blast to read.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
old comics, it's just such a there's so much to it. There's there's the stories that are told, and then there's this idea that, oh, the publishers think these stories are awful, right? And they don't care about them, they don't get them, but for some reason the kids are buying them, so we got to pump them out. And so then there's that aspect, and then how does that editorial deal with the artists? You know, how do they treat them, and then how do they display that treatment in the letters pages or the stand soapbox? You know, what is the glimpse that the reader gets of that world, of that creation? And so that's where my mind went with this, is okay, we've got these dumb stories, but we've got these people that made these stories that can be answering the letters pages, or writing a little editorial about the behind the scenes that you kind of realize that's probably not exactly what's going on behind the scenes, you know. And
mhm.
so for me, that was a lot of fun to explore. And I actually had this big argument with a friend, because he's like, but I, Doris Danger, it's like, who's the character? And I said, oh, the character, it's very simple. She's a photojournalist, and she's trying to prove Doris Danger. She's trying to prove monsters exist. And he says, yeah, but what's her character? And I said, no, you don't get it. That's it. That's all you need. It's these stories, you know, and then the stories, they pop up every week in the paper. You just need to know that, and then you're good to go, right?
So you made an interesting comment a minute ago that you saw Jack's Hunger Dogs graphic novel, and you're like almost repulsed by it. Which that first Commandy issue I saw, I was repulsed by, because it's like, this guy can't draw. He's got square knees and the fingernails like he talked about, and oh man, the women are not pretty. They're just kind of just these exaggerations and caricatures of what a woman's supposed to look like. And did you was that like the first Kirby that you were aware you were seeing, the Hunger Dogs thing,
I,
or was it the monster stuff prior and you didn't necessarily connect that it was the same person?
I don't remember for sure when I read, like I read the first Captain America, the first Hulk. Um, I saw some of those early issues, and I I don't think I put together that it was Jack. As far as like when I started collecting and really looking at who it was, I'm trying to think. It might have been Superpowers, you know,
Hmm,
or it was right around that era.
yeah.
So whatever he put out then, I would see and go, ugh. And I bought it because, I grew up in a small town and there weren't comic shops. So all you could buy was what was on the rack that month at the supermarket. And, so I'd go one week and buy 6 books, and go the next week and buy 6 books. And then I had everything except that one book. And, okay, I'll give that a try. And then it's like, oh, it was that guy, Jack Kirby again.
Well, in your defense, that was not the best Kirby work that you were picking up then, obviously. And I've always wondered, because I picked it all up because I had already been a longtime fan of Jack's work. So I picked it up and I kind of looked at it like, uh, I liken it to when you see like the character. If you, I don't know if you watched Friends during its original run on TV, but if you see the actors from Friends now, you see them, they're like, oh, they look pretty good, but there's a level of, oh, but I want them to be like they looked, in the 1990s, right? And that's kind of how it was with Jack's work. It's like, oh, okay, superpowers. Well, oh, Hunger Dogs. Okay. Yeah, even Captain Victory, whatever. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I love Jack, so I'll read these and I'll get some level of enjoyment out of them. But I really wish the art looked like it did back in 1968 or 1972, And but I can't objectively understand what it would feel like to see like that Hunger Dogs thing going into it cold, not being a longtime Kirby fan.
And
I'm
him
kind
writing it
of
too.
on a level, and I am a big Kirby fan because it just wasn't. It's too overdone. Jack's stuff's supposed to be simple, and they like overcolored it, and the inker on it wasn't great. The Mike Royer inked 17 pages originally, and those pages are in there, but then they modified those pages and then had a different inker do the others, and it was just kind of like I don't know. It was like I'd give it an A for effort, but a C for execution. Whereas the stuff in the 70s, even the weakest issues of Commandy, that'd be an A minus at the lowest in my mind. So
And I was going to say too, the writing, especially compared to the writing that was coming out in the 80s, he's got an odd timbre, to everyone's voices, and it's very creative, but you kind of have to accept this is the Kirby language,
I also think me having 20 years prior, no, that came out in 84, 85. To me, having 15 years prior to kind of gradually build up to how Jack was writing at that point made it a little more palatable to me as a reader. But I totally get why. Jack left Marvel and the writing all of a sudden was just it drew people like crazy. They're even Stan Lee dialogue on Jack's story, and then all of a sudden it's still Jack's story. It's great imagination. Words in the Balloons is very different, and I think it's that same kind of jarring jump. It would have to be for somebody like you said, Frank Moore or Alan Moore in the early '80s, and then they pick up the $100 graphic novel. Like, it makes sense because you got to have a certain connection to Kirby to really get what he's getting at a lot of stuff. So, easy for me as a Kirby fan at that point to deal with, but I can't imagine. And then Superpowers was just this big piece of fluff to make Jack some money, and his heart wasn't necessarily in it in that regard, but it was fun to see Jack draw like Dr. Fate, and who else was in there? Green Lantern, Wonder Woman characters you've seen Kirby do before. That was so there's fun stuff in there. There's nobody's going to hold those up and go, wow, this is the best Kirby ever, right? But then again, he wasn't invested in it. He wasn't even writing the first series until the last issue. So, that later Kirby stuff, it's fun. It's got its place.
I enjoy it now. I realized professional wrestling is horrible writing, but it's very entertaining and fun. Soap operas, terrible, but you can't stop watching them, and you realize they're aspects of enjoyment. Like even Star Wars, the writing isn't great, but
right.
But it's just so fun, and
yeah.
you can if you appreciate different aspects of what makes something good, you can find enjoyment in a lot of stuff. So
well, it's funny that the first 2-3 years of the Kirby Collector, before we started doing other magazines and books and stuff and just didn't have time anymore, we would hand mail all the copies. And I had 3 or 4 buddies that would come over and help, and I'd order pizza, and we'd sit there for 4 hours stuffing, copies of the Kirby Collector in envelopes and label them and all that stuff. And one of them, my friend Ed, was a huge fan of professional wrestling, but none of the rest of us were. So we're sitting around this big table stuffing and eating pizza, and he's going on and on about, the latest what Vince McMahon actually jumped in the ring and smashed somebody with a chair, and it was like, and we're like listening to it. It was like, are we listening to? Is he dictating a superhero story almost? It sounds like some kind of crazy Jack Kirby adventure going on, but it was professional wrestling.
Yeah,
I don't think he ever
costumes, and they punch people out, and they've got their personalities. It's a total superhero comic book in real life in the arena.
Yeah, but it is fascinating that all 4 or 5 of us guys all had kind of different interests beyond comics that we would all bring to the table there, and it was interesting to see the wide range of people, not that just your comics fans, but that ended up being Jack Kirby fans. And he spoke to different people at different age groups. I mean, there are people that think Devil Dinosaur is the best thing Jack Kirby ever did. And it's got to be based on like the age you discovered it, because it sounds like you're 10 years. I'm 10 years ahead of you on discovering Kirby, so I'm going to be 10 years ahead of you on probably what my favorite Kirby work is, I would assume. Yeah, and I deal with a lot of people. They're 10 years ahead of me, and their favorite Kirby work is like 1964 Fantastic Four, before Joe Sinnott started inking it. And more power to them. That's certainly not my favorite stuff. But you know, that's what's beautiful about it. The guy, 50 years career, he's got such a broad range of fans. And then, of course, now there's people that pick up what's going on in the Marvel films, and they are starting to understand there was this other guy behind it, and just that Stan guy that's in all the cameos. That's the fascinating thing to me, to see people that have maybe never read a 60s Marvel comic, but they know who Jack Kirby is, at least on some level. I think stuff like your work, what we do, you know, what so many other people are doing, what Mark Evanier does, beating the drum all these years, Steve Sherman, who's no longer with us, but I mean, he was a huge supporter of Jack and helped him get his name out there and make sure people knew what he was doing. All that stuff has really paid off. And you know, I can't think of another artist. I mean, Neil Adams, God bless him. I loved his work. He was an awesome guy, did a lot of great stuff for comics, and an amazing talent. Is he going to have the long-lasting influence that Kirby does? I don't know. And Will Eisner's another one. Will Eisner died literally the day my youngest daughter was born. I found out about 2 hours after she was born in the hospital. Things had finally calmed down, and I'm like, let me look at my phone here. What's going on in the world? And I was like, oh, Will Eisner died. Oh, my gosh. Sounds like he died literally within the same hour my daughter was born, which was just kind of freaky to me. But I'm still a huge Eisner. And talk about an influential artist within the medium itself. But I don't think that many people outside of us, right, our little tribe of comics fans, really know and appreciate what Eisner was and what he did. But I'm seeing Kirby out there really getting traction just in the general population. People that I know with my father-daughter groups I've done with my daughters over the years and stuff. And, you know, you meet these dads for the first time, and they're like, oh, what do you do? And I kind of tell them. And they're like, and then somehow the name Jack Kirby comes in, like, oh yeah, I've heard of that guy. Didn't he do a bunch of superhero stuff? It's like, yeah. So it is crazy how stuff spreads over time if you keep beating that drum long enough, I guess. So.
Yeah, you brought up something interesting about depending on when you're that key age.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to speak to you. And my wife has a master's in psychology, and we talk about this kind of stuff a lot. And you know, there's the people that they're older and they only listen to that music from when they were a kid, or they'll say, oh, movies suck today, you know, a good movie, and they'll name a movie from when they were that perfect age, you know. And what my wife and I discuss is how there's that object, the movie or the comic or the actor or whatever, the toy, the game, but there's also that remembrance of that time when you discovered it, and where you were and who your friends were, and how it reminds you of this friend or this relationship or this love or this first kiss, or, you know, whatever. And that packs that thing with a lot more importance. And you don't have those magical important times in your life so much afterwards to make that connection, you know. And we surmise that has something to do with this magical, intense bond to whatever that one thing is, you know. And it's really fascinating.
So I'm in the car the other day, and I got Spotify on, and I'm bored, and I want something different to listen to. And for some reason, an old song by the Osmond Brothers, you know, Johnny Osmond, it's running through my head. You know, being in music school, songs run through your head all the time. For the rest of your life, you can't help it. For some reason, this Osmond song was running through my head. I haven't listened to any Osmond music for a long time. But man, I remember as a kid, that was everywhere. I'm like Spotify, Siri. But I played the Osmonds, and let's just say it did not stand the test of time the way it seemed like it would have. Yeah, but the Osmonds were like the number one worst repeat listeners, worst for having repeat listeners of stuff that they did back in the 70s in terms of who strings old stuff on Spotify now. So, which is all fascinating to me because they were the hottest thing going at one point there. I remember as a kid watching the Osmonds cartoon. They had their own cartoon show. So did the Jackson Five. Well, we know Michael Jackson took off, um, I find that fascinating how memory and nostalgia factors in stuff. We're seeing that with our latest magazine. It's called Retro Fan, and it's all about just feeding off of nostalgia and learning the behind the scenes history behind all these things we grew up on, whether it was bubblegum cards or Hot Wheels or Barbies or Slurpee cups, whatever. And a lot of the actors and TV shows and stuff we grew up with, what actually happened behind the scenes on those and why they ended, things like that.
Yeah.
A strong pull for people, and you're still 10 years younger than me. You'll be seeing that more as you go on over the next year, sure. But it's huge for people. We do, in addition to comic conventions, we do nostalgia shows. And it's just that is the happiest group of people you will ever encounter in your life.
Sure.
Way more than people at Comic Cons. And people at Comic Cons have a great time. But at nostalgia shows, everybody to a person is just so glad to be here. Maybe they're just glad to be anywhere because a lot of them are like 80 years old. But it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I hope comics don't reach that point where they're only a nostalgia factor. I'm looking. The newest issue, back issue, is looking back at Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, which I'm somewhat familiar with, but I certainly didn't follow it all the way through. And looking at that, a lot of that was so avant-garde and cutting edge for its time. And that was the era where comics really branched out and went way beyond just Superman punching Lex Luthor and having green kryptonite, making him weak. I'm very cautiously optimistic the comics will be around another 50 years from now. I may not be, but hopefully they will be, and beyond that, hopefully Kirby will as well. So, I'm glad there's still people out there, carrying the torch for comics and working hard. Man, comics is hard work.
Yes.
The amount of hours people put into stuff, just unreal, and the amount of thought. Like talk about your strip, the amount of you spend 30 hours thinking about something and 1 hour drawing it, probably, I would assume.
It takes a long time to draw too. It's all time consuming. About the nostalgia thing, Doris Danger, for me, that's one of the big kind of ideas back here that I'm thinking about is this idea of I'm aspiring to make a comic that is as magical and strange and fun and as awful as you remember those childhood comics to be, like, oh, this was so crazy, and you start describing it and you think, wait a second, this is not good at all, but it's still so magical, and then you revisit it like you revisit the song and you go, yeah, this is really awful, but I had that magical connection to it and it was so special to me back then. How do we capture that magic? And that's what I attempt to do with Doris Danger. So,
well, you go back and read any one of those Kirby Atlas monster stories, you're like, oh, well, okay, that was pretty good. It's not the best thing ever, but it's fun and entertaining. Okay, great. But the thing is, there were so many, and they were so repeating the same basic story over and over again, just with the different monster of the month.
yeah.
Occasionally, you get a little twist in there for the plots, but they were pretty formulaic mostly.
Yes.
I would personally love to see, and I would pay good money to see a Doris Danger film. If you could get it done right, and make it, sort of like an airplane style, totally off the wall, under this pretense of being a serious thing, and then you get into it, and it's just like
Live action, right? Not a
ridiculous.
cartoon,
Oh yeah,
but
absolutely.
actors delivering that dialogue, right?
Yeah. But and as soon as one monster is vanquished, another one just pops up out of the woodwork, and you got to start all over again and over again. I think that would be a scream. Maybe, hey, Hollywood, pay attention. This could be your next big thing. So I'm curious, have you had any interest anywhere of anyone taking that and doing something beyond comics with it?
I feel like I had one guy years ago that showed a little interest, but and then he kind of checked back in every few years, but nothing ever came of it. I always said, hey, send me your idea for the
Mhm.
contract. What you got in mind? Yeah, I remember, 20 years ago when I first started doing comics, it seemed like everyone was getting movie options, and
Right.
it's when Netflix started getting big, it seemed like more people were starting to kind of get visits, but yeah, no one's ever come my way really. I
Oh, I
tried to
remember.
get some stuff going too, and wasn't able to get any traction with anything. So
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Well, hopefully, fingers crossed. I've learned if you stick around long enough, good things eventually happen. So
you
I try to convince
realize,
my
oh, he's
daughters of
still
that as
around.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have kids?
I've got two kids. They're in high school. Two boys.
Ah,
Yeah.
two boys. Oh, okay. You got a whole different dynamic at your house than I've had at mine. So,
It was a
uh,
lot of work on the front end. A lot of shouting and tears from everyone in the house. But they've grown into being these amazing boys. I don't know how we did it, but I my wife says you can't take all the blame. You can't take all the credit.
yeah. Yeah, I've got two great daughters. They're both in college now. So we are officially empty nesters,
Yeah.
which is really a strange experience. But it does offer me a little more time to get the Kirby collector done. So, because I always have to set that aside and work on, all the stuff that brings in the money, right? With all the other magazines and books and stuff. And finding the time to sit down with Kirby is great. But it's the same thing I think you mentioned earlier. Once I finish an issue, I've got to take a break. I've had enough Jack Kirby for a little while. I need at least a week off without having to think and spend my 30 hours a day thinking about Jack Kirby
Yeah.
before I can get re-energized and back into it. But invariably, it never fails. After a week or two off, all of a sudden, the juices start flowing again. I'm back into, oh yeah, I remember why I love Kirby so much. And going to conventions and things, particularly San Diego, always invigorates me because I mean, that was his hometown. I mean, there's Kirby fans galore. They're even still to this day. I love WonderCon too. That's coming up in end of March this year. That's ended up being a really good show in terms of, old time comics fans and Kirby fans, especially as well. It's like old home week getting together there with the people that we've been seeing for 30 years at conventions every year.
Yeah.
Just a blast. And the California vibe really, for Jack coming from New York City the way he did, to have fit in so well in California, that fascinates me too. Because it is a totally different vibe there.
For sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but honestly, much more to my liking California than New York. I love all of our readers in New York. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong,
Just
but
don't tell the guys in New York.
that's right. That's right. But it's a different thing in New York than California, definitely. So, but
John, it's been so great to visit with you. Thank you
well,
so
same
much
here.
for taking the
Same here.
and I look forward to seeing you at the next show.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Good luck on the book, and let's keep in touch.
And your continued success. And it's so great you putting in this work with the documentation for history to continue to enjoy. It's awesome.
Well, I have lots and lots of help. So hundreds of Kirby fans helping all the time, keeping Richard Colpin keeping the Jack Kirby checklist updated as we find new things and correct old things. I mean, the guys at the Jack Kirby Museum constantly on the search for new Kirby art that nobody knows about. So, guys like Mark Evan here, keeping. Anytime I have a question, I call Mark, and if Mark doesn't know the answer, he will find it. So, I cannot thank people enough for all the help they've given me over the years. So it's been a blast.
Right on. All right. Until next time.
Hey, same here. Good seeing you.
You too.